Hello and welcome to the From Way Downtown podcast. I am IndyStar Pacers editor Nat Newell, here, of course, with our Pacers insider, Dustin Dopirak. Uh, we just had a little brief pre-show meeting and noted that the Pacers are kind of what they've been, although I think the last time we did this kind of podcast, I was down on them for being what they are, and I think I'll be more up on them for being what they are now. But obviously, two great wins. They beat Orlando, beat Oklahoma City, and then, of course, they lose to, well, I guess they're not, Chicago's not necessarily a lottery team, but a
Play-in team.
top
Yeah.
Six contender in the East in the Chicago Bulls, all because they could not get one rebound. But where are you at on this team? I mean, again, there's some positives and there's some negatives, and how do you balance those two things out this week?
Yeah, no, I do. We're continually sort of in the same spot, talking through this team and its flaws and whatnot. And obviously, it's in a place where it just, you get the impression that everybody else is going to make a run, and the Pacers are just kind of going to hold steady. That they're maybe going to win, 2 out of every 3 if they're lucky. Sometimes 2 out of every 4, and just hang in there. And that's probably going to be enough, at this point, to get them into at least the play-in, probably in a positive play-in situation where they're at least going to get a home game in the play-in, and an opportunity, to only need to win 1 out of 2. But you're not sure how much higher they can get. I mean, they can pull the 6. It's not out of the question they can pull the 6. And, because certainly, Philadelphia is still struggling. Miami is not, making the leap that you would expect them to make for the fact that they just still have Jimmy Butler. And you expect the Heat, around playoff time to make a run. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I guess the Knicks are going to get going at some point in time. Now they have Anunoby back, and at some point they're going to get Randall back, and they're going to have a full team and be able to make a little bit of a run. But, the Pacers are just going to keep holding steady like this. They're going to win some games you don't expect them to win, then lose some games you don't expect them to lose. And generally, if they're dealing with a back-to-back or some kind of, the word is not adversity. I don't want to call it that, but if they're in some kind of adverse conditions, they're going to have a hard time getting a win. That's kind of who they are at this point. I think they're a better defensive team than they were, and that that makes them somewhat better. But they've lost a lot of firepower. Mathurin being out on top of the Hield trade having already been made. You're not making up for the loss of Hield, and then now you're losing another player. And so ultimately, they're a team that has less offensive firepower than it did at its peak. And as good as Siakam, I think, has been, he's not making up for all of that by himself. So they're in this weird place where they're good enough to beat a lot of teams. They're good enough to beat the best teams, but they're just not good enough to win 4, 5, 6 in a row.
Did Rick Carlisle make the right decisions last night strategically? Obviously, fouling DeRozan late when they're up 3. What are your thoughts on that eternal basketball topic?
I mean, he made explainable ones. I mean, certainly I think that's the more agreed upon conventional logic at this point, is that you have to foul and try to put somebody on the line because it's really tough for them to be in a position where it works out for them, where they get a rebound and put it back. And it just so happened to be a situation where they were probably, if Toppin tips it anywhere else except directly out of bounds, you probably run a little bit more clock off, and you're closer to a scenario where it's harder for him to get a shot, for DeRozan to get a shot. But it was just, he sort of knocked it straight out of bounds, giving him just enough time to get that, easy turnaround jumper on the baseline. I mean, so I understand fouling, while up 3. I mean, I think one thing that you would note is DeRozan's not a great 3-point shooter. He's an excellent mid-range shooter. And it just so happened that he worked out the opportunity to get a free throw and then a mid-range jumper and get his 3 points that way to tie the game. Certainly, I don't think you can plan for that. So it's explicable. It's justifiable. If he hits the 3, then you look stupid for not fouling. And you get asked the question for why you didn't foul. He leans to be a guy that does foul, and I get it. It's a totally justifiable idea. I can see the reason for saying, well, DeRozan's probably not going to hit a 3. He's got a better chance of hitting a 2 on you. So let him take the 3, and trust it. And so I get that. And he was, I think, 0 for 5 at 3 at that point. I think he hit his only 3-pointer in overtime. Of course, you don't know if he'd have made it then. Because he was DeRozan, he was on that kind of heater. So it's justifiable. Was it right? I don't know. It didn't work out. So, I don't know that you can call it right, but it's not stupid.
Yeah. So you had to have basically everything go wrong for you in the last,
Mm.
I think it was 3 seconds, and
Yeah.
everything did go wrong for them. This
Mhm.
is, there's I don't know what the actual percentage is, but if there is a 10% chance that
Mhm.
something goes wrong,
Mhm.
that's probably the thing, that you should probably take the 90% chance. But that
Mhm.
does 90% is not 100%, and you can get the 10% chance, and that's
Yeah.
seemed to be what happened last night.
I think the one fair argument is you probably should have had somebody in there. If you were going to foul, you probably should have had somebody in there that was designed to foul, and you probably should have got Aaron Neesmith off the floor.
Yeah.
Now it's a tough situation because it's like, all right, like if they won't call the foul, you want somebody there that can defend him. And Aaron Neesmith was probably doing the best job. Even though DeRozan was still getting his, you at least saw Neesmith bringing a lot of physicality to that matchup, and he has brought a lot of physicality to such matchups. But he gets foul number 6, and then you lose him for overtime. You certainly aren't expecting to get overtime at that point, but it happened. He'd made a couple big shots, a couple big free throws, and again, your best chance, I think, of defending DeRozan was having Aaron Neesmith on the floor, and maybe he gets a foul early in the overtime anyway, but still losing him did not help your cause going into overtime when once you're getting there, you have lost an advantage as far as defending their best player.
And I guess you could argue that maybe you foul, but you don't foul DeRozan, who, as you noted, is not a great 3-point shooter. Of course, he gets his first 3 in overtime and plays great in overtime because he's DeMar DeRozan. So again, it's to me, I don't believe there is a clear advantage statistically in that scenario, and you kind of just got to make your decision and live with it. And it cost him last night. And again, I don't, Obi Toppin should have done anything what he did, but again, watching the play, could he have grabbed the ball? I don't think so.
I don't think so. No,
And
I don't either.
then what are you trying to do? Would he have been better off knocking the ball up straight up in the air? I guess, but then what if someone from the Bulls grabs it? You're right there, and you can just pop it right back in.
Yeah, I guess your only hope is to knock it
Things
backwards.
don't go your way.
Yeah. Your only hope is to knock it backwards. I don't think he had any momentum to put it anywhere other than where he did. I think he was just trying to get a hand on it to make sure it didn't come down in the lane and somebody get an easy look in the lane right there. It's totally justifiable what he was doing. He didn't have 2 hands up. I don't know if he could have got a second hand up. There were, other hands around his. I just don't think he could have pulled it down. I don't think pulling it down was an option. So I get just knocking it around and hoping you get enough chaos there that it makes it impossible for them to get a shot. It just so happened he removed all the chaos by knocking it right out of bounds. Directly with enough force that it got out of bounds swiftly, and not a lot of time came off the clock after he made contact. And that's the tough part. It's just, again, if that thing just gets another bounce or two, before it goes out, then you've got a chance to run out the clock there, but just, it went straight out, and, it minimized the amount of time that you can run off. And that was just enough time for DeRozan to get a clean catch and a clean turnaround.
And again, I don't. This one didn't bother me quite as much. It's the second game of a back-to-back. You've just beaten the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are, I would say, the second best team in the West. Maybe they're the third best, but whatever. There's 3 teams right at the top that are probably the second, third, and fourth best teams in the NBA right now. And you beat one of them on the road. What did we? And before that, you'd really struggled with Orlando. You beat them on the road. What did we learn about the Pacers and where they're at right now in those 2 wins, going forward for the rest of the season?
I think, more than anything else, I think they finally did what they were asked, I guess what they've been asked. I think, Rick Carlisle, you asked him about defense, and he never wants to get too deep into details, but his point is always presence and force, and always just bring a level of physicality and kind of oomph to the job, and basically just be tough on guys. Understand that when you're guarding the best players, they're probably going to beat you. They're probably going to score. If they average 25, they're probably going to score 25. And if they average 30, they're probably going to score 30. And your job is to make it as hard for them to score 30 as possible. Force them to take as many shots to get to 30 as they can. And they really did a good job of collectively doing that. Of starting with the guys that were sort of spearheading that, with the Andrew Nemhards and the Aaron Neesmiths. I thought those guys had a really good couple of days. but just made it hard on Paolo Banchero, made it hard on Franz Wagner, in Orlando, and then made it hard on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and made it hard on everybody else, Giddey and Dort and Chet Holmgren even. They just did a good job, a better job than they have at any, I think, 2-game stretch this year of making it difficult on great players to get shots, and then also covering well enough not to let somebody else beat them. I mean, it was pretty sturdy defense. Holding Orlando under 100 was a big deal. I mean, you just hadn't seen that. Obviously, Orlando's not a great offense, but it's got guys that specifically cause the Pacers problems. It's a big lineup with a lot of length, a lot of size that they've had issue with. And so, I mean, they had issue with Toronto for the same reasons. It's like those teams, those two teams that can go, Orlando starts 3 guys that are 6'10". Franz Wagner's their small forward, he's 6'10". And so being able to have that much height and size tends to cause them problem. And the fact they were able to out physical them for once shows a level of growth that they're capable of doing that. And I think, a big part of the reason why I think they are a better defensive lineup now, they've lost something offensively with the Hield and Mathurin injuries. I think they're a better team defensively with Ben Shepherd in the starting lineup, and even, not in the starting lineup, in the second unit, and even getting some minutes out of Jarris Walker. It's a team that has to be more physical. It's a team, I think, that knows it has less of a margin of error, less of the same ability to just outscore people, where it could do that when it had Buddy, and Buddy Hield knew that, because, I mean, he wasn't a great defender, but he knew, okay, well, I'm going to be the guy who makes shots and works it out that way. I think they're a group of guys that know that they can score, but they can't score like they could. Like they used to, and no defenses, it's really serious this time that you don't have the same capacity to drop 140, 150 on somebody at some point. Like, you have to get stops, and if not, you're going to lose.
You think they regret the Hield trade with hindsight being 2020 and Mathurin being out?
I mean, they should. I mean, we've talked about it since day one. I think, you and I were kind of on this, you shouldn't trade this guy train. Now with Mathurin out, I mean, it's a significant loss. I mean, when you're like, their depth is still their strength, and their second unit is still really good. I mean, last night they still outscored Chicago 47-16 off the bench. I mean, McConnell, Jalen Smith, Obi Toppin, those guys can still score from their positions. But you were putting guys that were sort of elite at what they do in the second unit as wings in Mathurin and Hield. And right now, you don't really have replacement for that. And Ben Shepherd can hit the threes that you get him. I mean, he's not getting his own. When the ball movement finds him, he can hit a 3, and that's important. So I don't want to diminish what Ben Shepherd does. But Mathurin could obviously get his own, and Buddy Hield could obviously get his own. And Buddy Hield was just phenomenal at moving without the ball and getting space. And so, I mean, you're talking about 2 big-time scorers that you had in your second unit, and that was, I think, something that really could have served them well, going forward. I mean, again, since they have been sort of forced to discuss it again after Hield's interview with Yahoo, the story, on Hield from Yahoo with Jake Fisher, Carlisle obviously kind of, I think, gave a little bit more indication there that, hey, Buddy obviously indicated that he knew he had to get out. He saw an opportunity in Philadelphia that he really wanted. And I think, Rick Carlisle saying, it would have been selfish for us to keep him. It would have been. But also, selfishly keeping Buddy Hield is not the same as selfishly keeping Jordan Nora or Daniel Tice. I think it's selfish to keep a guy that you're not going to play. I think it is selfish to keep a guy that you're not going to play just to hoard him. If they would have not released Daniel Tice, that would have been selfish. Because it's like you're just hoarding a guy on the maybe chance that he can make an impact somewhere down the road, but you don't have any minutes for him. And Jordan Nora, you don't have any minutes for him. Whereas you had minutes for him last year, you believe both of those guys deserve to be pros and deserve a chance, and you can't give it to them. And so it is selfish then to keep guys that you can't give an opportunity to. It is significantly less selfish to keep a guy that you can play 25 minutes a game, but wants more than that. I think, and I think there had to be ways of, making him happy, making him feel wanted, making him feel like it was a good idea to do whatever he was going to do. Like, I get, my view is if he says, I want, to go to Philadelphia, and you look at the return and say, buddy, it's just not right. Like you're too good for us. You're too helpful for us. We need you more than we were going to need whatever we're going to get from this. We still want this team to be good. We still think you can make an impact. I think you can make that argument and say, we're going to make sure that you get enough opportunity to go get paid. Like even if we're not going to be the ones who do it, we're going to make sure you get enough shots that you're going to make, that you're going to get paid heavily on the open market next year. We know Philadelphia would probably get you on some level is a better opportunity, but you're too important for us. We're going to find a way. I think there was a way to do that. And I mean, I was just thinking about it now. Like, I mean, if you look forward to next year, like what's the thing that they could most use? Like I don't think there's anything they can more use than a movement shooter, and it's like, okay, like he's, if you look at what free agents on the market, it's like, if you didn't just have Buddy Hield, I think the guy that they would target would be Buddy Hield. So, I think, I mean, the next guy on the list that I got, in terms of like who I think would fit and who I think they could pay would be Gary Trent, unless he stays where he is in Toronto. But, I think that's what they're going to need to be able to unlock this, I think it's still important for that offense to be as high octane as it can be. And I don't think it's as good as it can be when they don't have a guy like that has that kind of gravity and allows Tyrese Halliburton the opportunity to move the way that he wants to. And I don't think Halliburton has had that opportunity.
Yeah, I totally understand why Buddy Hield wanted to play somewhere else, because
Philadelphia in particular.
12 minutes, and when one of the games right before they traded him was something like that, there was a chance he was not going to get the minutes that he needed to show people, to show other teams that he's still Buddy Hield and that he's worth a lot of money in free agency. So I totally get that, but I don't think you're being selfish if you got a guy that you're paying $19 million a year and you still might need him. You still needed him at the time. You definitely need him now. So on one hand, I do think the Pacers will regret that trade in retrospect. On the other hand, they did just beat Orlando and Oklahoma City, so I don't want to like exaggerate how big a deal. Again, I don't want to exaggerate how big a deal the Buddy Hield trade was. So, but I mean, I guess so. What the question would be: are they better or worse now than they were before? But with these. Have they been better the last 3 games than they were before these last 3 games?
I guess. I mean, they were big wins. I don't think you can deny that. I mean, and Chicago's a significant loss, and so there are ways in which they are better. I mean, there are ways in which they are better. I would say, again, because they can defend tougher. Because they've got a guy like Shepherd who can really, who really sort of fits in as a positional guy. It is helpful. And I guess the way the defense is stepping up at an opportunity when they need them, I mean, you could argue that they are. Again, I think long-term, they're just going to regret not having Buddy. There's going to be opportunities where they wish they had Buddy. And on that note, I think they also do need something from Doug McDermott at some point. I think you're looking at it and seeing, I mean, like they're on a stretch now where they're not shooting well. I mean, like Halliburton's got something to do with that individually, but collectively they're not. Collectively, I think they've been under. I think they've only shot better than 40%. Like I'm gonna have to look it up to make sure. Probably once out of the last 6 or 7 games, maybe less than that. Let me double check that and make sure I'm saying this right. Yeah, I mean they're coming off. So last night was 31.1, 32.1, 34.8, 38.5. Before that, Dallas was 46.2. Before that was 20% against San Antonio, 31.3 against New Orleans, 36.8 against New Orleans, 31.0 against Toronto, 38.9 against Dallas. So since Detroit, which was the first game back, they've only shot better than 40% from 3 one time. And that's an issue for a team that wants to move as fast as these guys do. Obviously, defense, allows them to get on the run, allows them to get on the break. But when you have a wide open floor, you need to be able to knock shots down. And again, I just think they're missing something. I mean, obviously, Hield wasn't as good as he had been. He was still a high volume guy, but I still think that's something that they're missing. And so there's an opportunity for Doug McDermott when he comes back from this calf strain. And I don't think they need they need legitimate production from him. I think they need somebody to step in and be able to hit open shots because there's a lot of guys out there right now that are taking open shots that are not hitting them. I mean, Miles Turner is probably their best 3-point shooter right now. With Halliburton struggling, and so as helpful as it is to have a 5-man that can hit those kind of shots, you need more, and you need it from other guys, and so they need it from somebody else to be able to step up.
Yeah, I mean, really, what also is hurting them is that Halliburton. Last podcast we talked about the slump he was in. He kind of snapped. He mostly snapped out of that, but he's still not shooting threes well. And you lost Hield, who was a legitimate volume 3-point shooter, but you had Halliburton, who was a legitimate volume 3-point shooter. Now he's not. He hasn't been lately. And the other guys they've got, I mean, Naismith, Smith, Nemhard, all those guys can shoot. Turner, all those guys can certainly shoot threes. But they also, they're not guys that you say, "Uh-oh," when they catch the ball necessarily.
Right.
So, I mean,
you also have to tee them up. I mean, that's the other thing too. Like each of those guys are catch and shoot 3-point shooters.
Yes,
they're not hunting their own. Where Halliburton can get his own shot, certainly with that step back. And it's not that those guys can never hit a step back three, but for the most part, you've got to tee them up. And you didn't have to tee Buddy up. You mostly do, or he's certainly at his best at catch and shoot. But he's also really, really, really good at movement. That's the thing. Like little stuff like that is stuff that you kind of miss. But like Buddy's ability to kind of like blur and ghost screen and all these kinds of things, and just sort of create space by moving around and dragging his guy with him. But just having an ability to get open. Run off screens, just whatever you want to do. I mean, Buddy had a remarkable ability to get open, and these guys are fine at it. And I'm not just saying that there's anything bad about the way they space, but like Buddy's ability to stay in constant movement, running to the corner every single time, and just sort of finding a way to create space was elite. And was really elite. And so they don't have anybody that's that elite. As good as, Nesmith and Jalen Smith's percentages are really good. But their volume isn't high because they don't look to create those shots off the bounce. They're pretty good in movement, but they're not great in movement. And Jalen Smith's a pick and pop guy. Obviously is a pick and pop 5. Just like Miles Turner is. So you're just not going to get the same kind of volume the way that they play the game that you could with Buddy Hield, and that matters. That is something else that is lost. And so Halliburton I think is capable of doing a lot of that. Again, he obviously is capable of creating his own. So it's really painful that he's not getting these threes to go down. You wouldn't say that he's in some ridiculous funk, and I don't think it's a physical thing at this point. I think when you're seeing him go to the basket, there's real explosion there. There's an ability to get there and finish, and kind of the step through stuff and everything that he's got is working as well as it has. And he's moving the ball well. He's just not getting just consistent the consistent deep ball to go down. He's at least getting to the point where he's hitting 1 or 2 a game, where he's not going over anymore, and that's important. At least getting 1 or 2 to fall. But you need to get him. Need to have him one of those nights where he hits 4 or 5 and gets back to being Tyrese Halliburton from outside.
Yeah, Halliburton is at 21.2% since February 25th, which was the win over Dallas in Indianapolis. So boy, that is rough. Halliburton's obviously been struggling with the shooting. What's the talk around the team in terms of, is it just a typical down?
Hey, hold up, Nat. It says pause. Nat, it says pause up in the right corner. Is it saying it's recording for you?
No, it's
in the
recording.
Left corner? It is recording.
Yep.
All right. Okay.
It was saying
Stop
pause.
Start it back over.
Button.
What's that?
I had the cursor on the pause button, but it's recording. But Clark can, I assume, cut it down. So,
okay. All right.
So again, Halliburton's obviously been struggling with the shooting. What's the talk around the team? Do they say it's just a slump, just a downturn that can happen, or do they think there's some reason for it?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where they're at. It's a downturn that could happen. I don't think, they obviously were defensive of it at first. Halliburton in particular was defensive of it at first. I think he's just looking at it as just something he's struggling through, and it's just trying to get right with it. I don't think he sees anything as being particularly wrong. I don't see anything wrong mechanically. It just seems to me, from my read of it, I think it's harder to get space. It is harder to get space for him, again, with Hield not being around, and just with the defense that he's dealing with, and with Mathurin not being around either. Obviously those guys weren't playing in the first unit, but he at least got some minutes with those guys. I think you can dedicate a couple bodies to him, and he's seeing it. And I think he requires a good amount of space and operation time to get a shot off. And I don't know that he's getting as many looks where he's got just the whole operation down together, because it does take a lot of time for him to get that shot off with the push and everything. He's good at getting that step back and creating space. But he's got to do a lot of things to make it work right. And it just seems like he's short a little bit. He's just a little bit off on it. And it just, there's some of those shots that he's, just rimming out. But I think he's got to force it a lot of times just because of the amount of, attention that he's dealing with. And I think that's one of the biggest drivers is that.
Bennedict Mathurin shoulder injury. You don't usually hear labrum for basketball players, but more of a baseball injury, and not a good baseball injury, but for a
No.
basketball player, not quite as serious. Just sort of general thoughts on him being out the rest of the year. Early returns are that it's not going to, again, 2 big wins, 1 bad loss. It's not going to, that's what the team was doing with Bennedict. I'm certainly not going to say the team's better, or not worse without him. What kind of impact does this have on him, team, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with him and go from there. I mean, obviously, I think it's tough just because I don't know that he's had something like this before. And I think he felt like he was making a lot of strides, and it's tough for it to just end like that. I think, also I think it's a surprise. It's one of those where I saw kind of the play identified, like I remember it happening, he kind of got knocked over and his arms were sort of out like this. And it just kind of like just jarred it loose. I mean, he played through it. Like, I think it happened in like the second quarter. And he played the rest of the way, on a torn labrum, and he still scored 17 points. Or was it 19? Had a pretty good scoring night, and so must have felt like, you see him kind of come off the floor, and he's kind of like rotates, like, that kind of hurt, but still managed to play through it. And so when you have that kind of situation, you're like, and you're a little bit more pain, and you're like, all right, I get it, but I'm gonna be okay. If I could play through that, I must be all right. And then to find out you've got a tear and your season's over, that's got to be, kind of stunning for him. I think he was, to hear everybody describe it, he was making real strides in terms of figuring out how to be the best player that he could be with this group. And it is a tough balance for him, I think, because he's just naturally such a, ISO, get the ball and go attack somebody and score kind of guy. Like, he had to figure out how to play on a team that wanted to move the ball all the time, that wanted to just to be in constant movement and not kind of put you in a position where you take some time, setting up and crossing a guy over 2 and 3 and 4 times so you can get your shot. I mean, he was just a really good one-on-one player. And he had to learn how to work that one-on-one skill into the team. And I think there were some ups and downs this year, but when you look at the full, it's just look at his stats now that his season is over. I mean, he was a more efficient player. I mean, he shot better from 3. He shot better from the field overall. Wasn't quite as good from 2, but close, and was still finishing the ball really well around the rim. Showed an ability to make, mid-range jump shots, was getting better at 3, but just doing a better job of, involving his teammates, moving the ball around, finding out when his opportunity was that he was supposed to attack. And he got a lot of compliments for that. I mean, I think he's still, it's still understood on the team that he's the guy that most wants to go get his own shot and is the most sort of bulldogged, occasionally, wrong-headed attacker, but, they still like the fact that he's got that kind of desire to do it. So I think they felt like they made strides on making him somebody that's better and can fit into what they want to do. And I think they saw strides on defense. They saw strides in the rebounding game. And they just saw him become a more physical player and, again, a better fit just within the unit. And so there were opportunities for him to make more leaps. And certainly he was going to get an opportunity to see postseason play and get a sense of what that was like. So I think they definitely feel like they've lost something in terms of his development, but they do feel like he made a lot of development in the course of this year, as much as it was sort of odd that, he was scoring less points and he didn't, he wasn't starting by the end of the year. I think they still felt like he had figured out a place that fit and made sense. And he was, making a lot of gains and strides. As far as they're concerned, I mean, I think, the loss is significant. Again, as we talked earlier, when you've already lost Hield, you go from having, there was something to be said for, okay, well, he's going to get more shots when Hield's not around and they each take away from each other. Well, when they're both gone, you've just lost a lot of firepower. You've just lost a lot of options. I mean, when you really look at what that second unit was when they were together, when you're talking about McConnell, Hield, Mathurin, Toppin, Jalen Smith, you have 5 guys who can be double-figure scorers, every night. And again, 2 legit starter level scorers, in the second unit as your wings, playing off a point guard who's really good at distributing, and, a 4 and 5 guy who can space and also rebound and score. So, I mean, that second unit had a chance to be really special. as constituted. And so they've been the best bench all year. But I mean, that group in particular didn't get too much time together, and I think it had a chance to be spectacular. So that's a significant loss that they don't have that in their back pocket, the ability to really blow other second units away. I mean, again, they're still winning a lot of those battles. They won 47-16 last night. They can still get, 40, 50 points out of the bench, but like that group had a chance to really go crazy on people. And I think they've lost some opportunity there. And again, lost another guy that, if Halliburton's not getting shots, if he's really being defended hard. I mean, I think he thought he did a good job in one of the recent games of, he and I think it was the Toronto game they lost, him and Siakam really were the two guys they could rely on. So really having a third or fourth option type of guy not being there anymore is a big deal. Of having somebody else that's really capable of creating his own. And so far it hasn't burned them yet, but it will. At some point they're going to wish they had a Bennedict Mathurin. They probably wish they had him last night. I mean, that probably is a game where he can make a difference, against Chicago. Maybe he'd have been not all right after on a back-to-back. But there were some opportunities. They just really needed to have somebody just go score and will them the buckets. And Siakam was willing to do that on certain occasions. I think they really missed not having Mathurin. And again, do I think it destroys them? No, I think it's a loss they can absorb because they have such good depth. But it's still a significant one. I think it just costs them a lot of firepower that could matter going forward.
All right. Well, this is our second YouTube podcast. First one did real well, especially for our first one. Had some great comments on there from the people watching, so we appreciate that. Please, as always, go to IndyStar.com where you can read all of Dustin's stuff. And thank you for joining us.